Good evening. My name is Dave, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. Thank you for joining our live interactive telephone town hall. We're hosting tonight's event to give Congresswoman Spanberger the opportunity to hear directly from you and answer your questions about the issues facing Virginia's families and economy. As I mentioned, this event is an interactive forum. Congresswoman Spanberger will be taking as many questions as she possibly can during the event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff. They'll take down your name and where you're calling from. The next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call, and you will be able to ask your question directly. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. If you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and you wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Additionally, if you would like to receive updates from our office via email, please press *6 on your phone keypad at any time, and an operator will collect your email address. We could receive a lot of questions during this event, so if we're not able to answer your questions, please call our district office at 804-401-4110 during normal business hours. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event, please press *3 on your keypad or type them below the streaming player. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger for some opening comments. Congresswoman Spanberger, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Abigail Spanberger, and tonight I look forward to hearing from you about the many issues facing your families, your businesses, and our communities. And this evening, I know we have several veterans on the line, so I want to take a moment and thank you on behalf of all Virginians for your service and for keeping our nation safe. And last week, I was proud to move forward multiple pieces of bipartisan legislation that would make sure that America's veterans receive the support that they have earned through their service on behalf of our nation. Last week, we passed the Honoring Our PAC Act in the U.S. House. This bill would expand VA healthcare eligibility to combat veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and this is inclusive of post-9/11 veterans. This inclusion of post-9/11 veterans means that more than 3.5 million toxic exposure-related conditions, that 3.5 million toxic exposed veterans will now have access to care. It also adds 23 burn pit and toxic exposure-related conditions to the VA's list of service presumptions, meaning that veterans will get healthcare benefits that they deserve. And I have heard from many veterans about the need for these reforms. And for those who aren't familiar with what it is that I'm talking about, so many of our nation's veterans who served in Iraq, who served in Afghanistan, were exposed to burn pits, literal pits where debris and items were burned, and what was being burned emitted toxic gases and fumes. And for years, veterans of these wars who had these exposures have had isolated illnesses that are consistent with their exposures, early onsets of cancer, certain neurological disorders, and finally, the United States Congress is moving forward with recognizing the impact of this service-connected exposure and the diseases that they have caused, unfortunately, in so many of our nation's veterans. So I was proud that we have moved forward on this legislation. We expect it to move quickly to the president's desk, and I look forward to be able to confirm that indeed it is signed into law, and we are finally and into the future recognizing this unique exposure and the impact. This is also right after we celebrated the Atomic Veterans Day, and notably our nation's atomic veterans were exposed to radiation in their service in the 40s and 50s, and for decades kept their service secret. I was so proud that last year we were able to move legislation forward that I led to ensure that every single year into the future, our atomic veterans receive annual recognition for their service and sacrifice. The legislation, the Honoring Our PAC Act, will go to the U.S. Senate, where we expect it will receive a similar level of strong bipartisan support before heading to the president's desk to be signed into law. And again, this is going to impact 3.5 million veterans nationwide. Another concern that I have heard from constituents relates to continued trafficking of fentanyl across our southern border. It is jeopardizing the lives of many of our neighbors here in the Commonwealth and frequently leads to fatal overdoses. The overdose deaths have reached record rates in Virginia and across the country, and I have been acutely attuned to the challenge fentanyl is creating for our communities, for those struggling with substance use disorder, and for our law enforcement officers who are the ones responding to the calls for help. In response to this threat, I was glad to see that the House passed my bipartisan legislation last week to strengthen our country's strategy when it comes to targeting and detecting fentanyl at our borders and ports of entry. The biggest challenge that we have with stopping it from coming into the country is with detection and with interdiction. As a former law enforcement officer and as a former CIA case officer, I know that we have a lot of work ahead of us as we boost our security at border checkpoints and prevent these traffickers from being able to kill more Americans, but ensuring that the detection capability at the border is able to interdict fentanyl is vitally, vitally important. This legislation passed as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which we passed in the House last week. It also included a pay raise for America's service members. The past few years have been difficult, certainly for our nation and also for our nation's servicemen and women, as well as their families. And that's why I will continue to work to make sure that veterans, military families, and active duty service members know that we have their backs. So I am proud of the legislation that we passed last week. For any veterans on the line, and I know we're going to be talking about a whole host of issues this evening, I do want to remind you all that the Virginia Department of Veteran Services can certainly always provide support, as well as my office. The Department of Veteran Service for Virginia is www.dvs.virginia.gov, and I spoke with their team earlier today, so I want to make sure I convey that information. Finally, I want to thank everyone for joining this evening, sharing your time. I hope we'll get to a whole host of questions tonight, talk about a variety of different issues, but please do remember, if you have any challenges with a federal agency, please contact my office. If you have an idea, if you have a question, if you didn't get the opportunity to have your question answered here tonight, please follow up with us. I look forward to your questions this evening, and I thank you again for joining us.
All right, thank you very much for those comments, Congresswoman. As a reminder, this forum is interactive, and we'd love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your questions. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. If you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask Congresswoman Spanberger a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. And we're going to head to the phones right now. First up, we have Richard in Chesterfield. Richard, you're on live with Congresswoman Spanberger. What's on your mind tonight?
Okay, thank you. Congresswoman Spanberger, I love what you're doing. I'd love to see you get reelected. I love your comments. I'd love to see you continue to distance yourself from President Biden. He's becoming a tremendous liability. And I know you made some statements, but following up with, we need to stop illegal immigration, allowing 4 million illegal immigrants to come across. And I know there's some valid ones in there, but just watching the news and watching constant streams of people coming across really just gets to me. Stopping that immediately, or making a statement that, hey, it needs to be stopped immediately, and I know you've done some things, stopping that will take care of long-term inflation and fentanyl problems and all kinds of other problems. It's like why we continue to allow it. And I know it's not your responsibility, but I'd like to see it. I'd like to see you come out with some statements on that, or really do some other action. You've done a lot of stuff, but I'd like to see more. And then like to see us go back to becoming energy independent. I've traveled around. I retired from the Navy. I've worked overseas in a lot of different countries as a contractor, military. It's an embarrassment to see the president going and begging for oil to do it. It's no different. It's cleaner to do it here. We need to go back to becoming energy independent, and we can continue on the path going to non-fossil fuel. But once again, not a complaint. I love what you're doing. I just love to see some more stronger comments. Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for your comments. Thank you for your kind words. You're also allowed to complain. Not everybody's happy, but I appreciate your comments. I'm going to go in reverse order. You talked about energy independence. I think it was incredibly important, and certainly I voted for us to no longer import any Russian energy. I think it's an important step to take. Meanwhile, I mean, notably, our importation of Russian energy was pretty substantially low. But I think, particularly given the war that they're waging against the Ukrainian people, it was an important step. But I think that this war has, of course, disrupted global energy markets, and we're seeing that at the price at the pump. And I think that this reality that we're living in right now should continue to demonstrate to us the value and the importance of becoming energy independent, be it Venezuela, be it Saudi Arabia, be it Iran, be it Russia. When we look towards the places that are on the world stage producing significant amounts of energy, those are challenged governments, certainly countries that we have challenged relationships with. And I think it speaks to the fact that pursuing our own energy independence is vitally important. And certainly the United States, we are a net exporter, which is helpful, but we continue to have reduced refinery capacity. We need to ensure that our refinery capacity is at the same level of our actual production. And you made comments about moving towards other types of energy production. Certainly, if we can be a major global leader in production of alternate types of energy, be it wind, be it solar, or nuclear, that's incredibly, incredibly important. Talking about issues related to immigration, I think you raised a couple important points, and certainly I was actually just in a meeting before this town hall with the Secretary of Commerce, and we were talking about a variety of propositions that a group of my colleagues were making relative to kind of regional trade, relative to regional employment, that could be potentially important to dealing with some of the humanitarian related reasons why people might choose to come to the United States. And so there are two kind of primary causes of immigration. One would be lack of opportunity, chaos or corruption in their home country, and a desire to come to the United States either for work opportunities or to file for asylum. And so that's why I continue to advocate for aid, regional stability and engagement programs. And notably, I had a piece of legislation that was signed into law by the former president, President Trump, that was bipartisan legislation focused on getting at the root causes of immigration related to regional issues, extreme weather events, lack of economic opportunity, violence, corruption in the country, et cetera. But another element of why people come to the United States is because we are the land of opportunity. We are the United States of America. And we will always have people who want to come to the United States. And frankly, we will always have jobs that want to hire immigrants. And where there's a disconnect currently is we do not have visa numbers that meet the economic demands. And certainly representing a district where there are so many agricultural and recreation-based jobs that so frequently are jobs that are of interest to people coming from other countries, and there just are not enough visas. So this is why I've been an advocate for the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which gets at two issues. One, ensuring that we have ample visas to meet the economic demands of America's farmers and producers who do want to hire labor from other countries. And also ensuring that we know who's coming to the country, because through the visa process, this legislation also requires use of the E-Verify system. It is an important piece of legislation. I've also, just one final thing, been vocal about the issue of Title 42, which of course is hate it or love it, neutral or otherwise. It has been in place for 2 years at this point. And we need to ensure that the administration and DHS has a strong plan in place at whatever point in time it's lifted. And so I've been very vocal in calling on the administration and signing onto legislation that would basically put really strict parameters around when the administration can lift Title 42, which ultimately we must as a country, but we have to be fully prepared when that time comes, which is why I have engaged with the administration and signed on to legislation that would put really significant parameters around when that step is taken. But thank you for the question. Thank you for allowing me to talk on 2 issues. And for those who might be watching the live stream, I am a note taker. So if I look down, that's what I'm doing. Thank you.
We're talking with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, and as a reminder, this forum is interactive, and we'd love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your questions. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. And if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask Congresswoman Spanberger a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. And in fact, we are going to go to an online question now here, Congresswoman. This comes from Bonnie, and Bonnie would like to know, you recently sent out an email about drug ads. I'd like Congresswoman to ban, or I'd like Congress to ban prescription ads. These ads run during news programs which are depressing enough for older viewers without hearing about side effects. And she didn't directly ask you a question, Congresswoman, but wondering if you could address that statement.
Absolutely. Well, I think that what she's referencing is I recently introduced a piece of legislation that requires significant truth in advertising related to prescription drug ads, pharmaceutical ads. So frequently we see that when you're watching an ad and sometimes they have beautiful scenery and butterflies and kind of lovely things, but then when they start talking about what the potential side effects are, it's distracting. And so notably, the United States and New Zealand are the only 2 countries in the whole world that allow direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceutical drugs. And GAO, Government Accountability Office, has found that manufacturers spend billions of dollars on these direct-to-consumer ads. And it's just a small number of drugs that make up for the spending. And we know that when there are these distractions throughout the advertisements, that consumers might be missing vital information. And there's pretty significant consumer safety concerns around even the existence of these direct-to-consumer ads. We know that they sometimes, and I've heard directly from physicians, that they'll have patients coming into their offices who saw an ad advertised and ask for that specific ad. And so it can really at times be a challenge for physicians in their physician-patient relationship. And certainly back in a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago, Congress required FDA to draft and finalize within 30 months of the passage of a bill, standards for determining how side effects can be presented in pharmaceutical ads. And so, this was more than 10 years ago, and the FDA has missed that deadline. So making sure that there are strict parameters around how marketing occurs, making sure that when there are discussed side effects of certain drugs, the way that those commercials are presented aren't obscuring that information for the viewer. That's important. And so I put forth legislation that gets at that challenge and is meant to ensure that viewers who see these commercials would have additional information, and certainly that the full scope of information meant to be presented, required to be presented to the viewer, is actually in a digestible form.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have got Thomas from Henrico. Thomas, you're on live with Congresswoman Spanberger. What is on your mind tonight?
Yeah, good evening, Congresswoman. Thanks for taking my question. I'm curious what your view or stance is with supporting Ukraine and the conflict they're having with Russia. My concern is, this is a nuclear power, and do we really believe that Russia is going to give up at some point, or that we can defeat Russia? To me, it seems like we're just throwing money out the window, even though I do feel for the people of Ukraine. But, they are in fact a corrupt government, and that's why they have not been allowed in NATO. Thank you.
Yeah. Thomas, thank you for this question. And actually, just this evening, we had a vote related to Ukraine, a sense of Congress supporting the decision by, or the request by Finland and Sweden to join NATO. And so that was an overwhelming vote of support. Just a few folks who didn't support it. And I think that this is an incredibly important step for the House, though we don't have the vote that the Senate has in terms of accepting their joining of NATO. I think it's important that the House show that there's so much broad bipartisan support. Now, speaking to the type of support that we're giving, my thoughts on the type of support that we are giving, it is vitally important that we help our friends, our allies, the Ukrainian people fight back against this Russian invasion. It is incredibly important that we work with our NATO partners and other allies to ensure that the Ukrainians have what they need to wage this war. And we have, from the very beginning, I think, we have done as a country extraordinary work in pulling together our partners to levy sanctions all at once, in denouncing this Russian invasion of Ukraine in a very highly coordinated, aggressive sense, in ensuring that the Ukrainians have, as the battle has changed, as the way this war is being fought has changed, everything from javelins to switchblade drones to HIMARS, and I continue to be focused and engaged as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee on ensuring that the Ukrainian people have the support that they need, be it from the United States or also from other NATO partners. An important thing here, I think, from an American perspective, is the recognition that Ukraine is not a NATO partner, but its neighbors are. And as we have watched Russian aggression against Ukraine, recognizing that if this aggression does not stop in Ukraine, it will move on and potentially at that point become a NATO engagement, where we would then have an obligation to engage militarily. So our support and provisions of communication aid and military aid, lethal and non-lethal, and medical aid is incredibly vital to the ability of the Ukrainian people, their military, to be able to wage this war as they continue to do. This investment in support of democracy is vital for our European neighbors and partners, for NATO members, and ultimately it is our efforts to ensure that we are protecting democracy, or actually supporting those who are protecting their own democracy. And so I am grateful for the question. I think certainly one more note that I would say is the United States has done a very, very good job of utilizing and leveraging the information that it's collected through intelligence means, particularly from day one, ensuring that our partners and allies knew what Russian plan and intentions were. And then, unfortunately, they've been very, very right since day one.
We're talking with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger on tonight's interactive town hall, and we're going to go back to Henrico. We have got Phyllis on the line with us. Phyllis, welcome to the phone call tonight. What's on your mind?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask how we could implement more trade schooling in our schools to educate the young. There's a lot of jobs out there that are paying good money, You don't always need a 4-year college education to get a good job. And right now, it seems like that industry is in high demand. You can't get people working in heating and air conditioning because they don't think it's a great job. They don't understand that what is needed. There's engine building. There's so many levels that a person in school may not be a straight A student, but could find their niche in the trades. And I wonder how we can start implementing that so it doesn't look like it's a lower class type job.
Well, I love this question, and I thank you for asking it, because I spend a fair amount of time visiting career and technical programs in our local high schools, visiting with some of our labor unions that have extraordinary apprenticeship programs where not only are you training to become a welder or an electrician or an HVAC installer, but you're getting paid while you're doing it. And it's the job opportunities that exist in the trades, I think, are just extraordinary, and not enough people know about them, quite frankly. And so what is it that I can do? What is it that we can do from a congressional standpoint? I mean, I think that I will continue to visit places where we are training the next generation of super necessary workers. We need our lights to work. We need the electrical grid to work. We need this building to be built. And I think that you're absolutely right that I think as a country, we should be celebrating the vital nature of these jobs. And from a congressional standpoint, when it comes to legislative standpoint, I think even recognizing the value of programs that are certificate programs or training programs. I have a piece of legislation called the Freedom to Invest in Tomorrow's Workforce Act. And this is a bipartisan piece of legislation that would say, you know what, some families choose, if they're able to have a 529, you want to plan for your child's future. So you invest in a 529. Well, this legislation that I've introduced would give a lot more flexibility to what you can use that 529 on. If you want to join the workforce in the trucking industry, if you want to go to a certification program that isn't a 4-year degree, that isn't a 2-year degree, that requires the skill set of training, if you have saved for your future and that's the future you want, you should absolutely be able to utilize those funds that way. And so this is a bill that I've put forth. Notably, even as we talk about issues within the supply chain, so many of the challenges we face in the supply chain relate to the fact that we continue to have a shortage of truck drivers in the United States, a vital and necessary job. And we continue to have a shortage. So I introduced legislation. I worked with the Virginia Trucking Association, which has just been a tremendous partner in thinking through how we can ensure that we're recognizing the value of and potentially recruiting more people to this important career set. And this bill would provide a refundable tax credit for people who are entering the workforce, and then also a retention refundable tax credit for people who are in the workforce, so that those who have the skill set stay a bit longer, and for those who might be interested, that refundable tax credit helps them get over the hump of potentially going through the training program and ensuring that they are able to do the job. But any parent on the line who's listening, I would just point to just the extraordinary programs that exist throughout our district. County to county, our high schools have incredible programs. Regionally, the various different organized labor groups have just extraordinary training programs, and many of which you get paid when you walk in the door. You're learning an unbelievably important skill, and you're working and bringing home a living and livable wage as you do it. So thank you for raising this question. I've got a variety of pieces of legislation aimed at supporting people's decision to move into the skilled trades, and I think as a country we should continue to celebrate those who literally, built the country around us and keep the lights on.
We'd like to thank you all for joining our interactive forum tonight with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, and we'd love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your questions. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. And if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and wish to ask Congresswoman Spanberger a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. Next up, we have Richard from Orange. Richard, you're on live with Congresswoman Spanberger. Welcome to the phone call. What is your question?
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'm a medically disabled retiree from the U.S. Army. I was wondering if there has been any movement on the Major Richard Starr Act legislation, and if there hasn't, what can we as veterans do to try and get that moving? Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for raising this important piece of legislation. And just for anyone who's listening, I want to just let you all know what this bill is that Richard mentioned. Back in 2004, Congress eliminated the offset for military retirees who have at least 20 years of service and disability ratings of at least 50%. And then we have a bill, the Major Richard Starr Act, which would expand this policy to recognize that there are many veterans whose careers were cut short due to combat-related injuries, and ensuring that it's approximately just under 50,000 retirees across the country, military retirees across the country, veterans, it would change their eligibility for their veterans benefits. This bill is bipartisan. I am a co-sponsor. I support this bill. It has, the last time I checked, more than 250 co-sponsors in the House. It was introduced by a Republican colleague from Florida. And at this point, I continue to be an advocate for this legislation. It's common sense. It recognizes the sort of unique nature of military service and the impact that combat-related injuries can have. In terms of what we can do to move it forward, as my constituent, I am happy to report that your congressperson is already supportive. But I think this is a really important area where veteran service organizations, VSOs can be active. And so where you might, if you are engaged with any VSO organizations, if you are part of any veterans networks, ensuring that people recognize that this legislation is out there, that it would impact thousands of veterans and why it's important, will continue to agitate it forward. And certainly, I am a supporter. We have, as I said, more than 250 House members who are supporters. But we will be able to move this across the finish line when everyone recognizes just how vitally important it is. So from my side, I continue to agitate for it. I think it makes sense. There has been efforts to introduce it as an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act as kind of part and parcel of a larger piece of legislation focused on the military and DoD. But it has not been able to move forward as part of that legislation. And so I thank you for your service. I am sorry that we have not gotten this one across the finish line yet. But I want you to know that I'm committed to it. And to answer your question about what anyone listening might be able to do, just ensuring that any veterans related organizations you may be a part of recognize that this legislation is vital, and continue to educate those maybe across Virginia who may have members of Congress who are not yet supportive, or across the region, so that we can continue to extend the kind of understanding of how vital this legislation is.
Okay, thank you for the phone call. We're going to take an online question now, and this comes from Parker. Parker asks, Congresswoman Spanberger, what are you doing to ensure that your constituents have access to necessary medical support of codifying Roe?
Thank you for this question. Certainly, it's been a number of weeks now since the Supreme Court has overturned the nearly 50-year precedent of Roe versus Wade. I continue to be engaged on efforts here within Congress to codify Roe, so at a federal level, ensuring access to safe and legal abortion at the level that was in place during the time when Roe was the settled law of the land. We see across the country that so many states are now putting in place pretty significant restrictions on access to healthcare. What that means is that a woman in some states who has had a miscarriage and typically would need to undergo a procedure known as a DNC. In some places, that's being denied. In some places, women with ectopic pregnancies are getting gravely, gravely ill before they're receiving any support. Of course, we've all seen and read about the case of a 10-year-old girl who became pregnant as a result of rape. The rapist has been arrested and charged. So thank God for that. But notably, this young girl, despite the horrors that she's endured, needed to travel out of state to receive the health care to protect her. What I have done, I have voted twice for the Women's Health Protection Act. This bill, which passed the House of Representatives, would ensure access to reproductive health and safe and legal abortion. We have also passed just last week a piece of legislation that would ensure that a woman can travel between states. Certainly what we're seeing now is some states that have chosen to have full and total bans on abortion, including pills early in pregnancy, including for support related to ectopic pregnancies, kind of under all circumstances. That there is a move to then criminalize women who may move or who may travel out of state. Some of the proposals related to how this would be implemented are just unthinkable and outrageous. Some of my colleagues from these states where this is being discussed are talking about how they're talking about pregnancy tests for women who are traveling to ensure they're not leaving the state pregnant. It's actually just really unthinkable. So we did pass a bill in the House. It was stopped in the Senate. That would ensure that people can travel between states freely. And so I voted for that. Next week, we will also, this week, later on this week, we will also be voting to protect access to contraception. Because indeed, in the ruling and in the write-up related to overturning Roe versus Wade, Justice Thomas specifically names the Griswold v. Connecticut case and the Obergefell case as being cases that need to be re-looked at and reconsidered. Notably, Griswold is what guarantees, under the premise of privacy, the right of couples to use contraception. And of course, we are already seeing that in some states, contraception such as IUDs are being considered potential abortifacients and therefore not legal. So ensuring that we are protecting the right of people to have contraception is a vote we are taking this week. And as it relates to the issue of travel, certainly the right to travel has been an actual bedrock American freedom since the Articles of Confederation, and the idea that states would try to hinder someone's ability to travel between states is just outrageous. I'll call it outrageous. So I voted last week to ensure that that's not the case. That's where we are in terms of updates. So much will be dependent on what happens within the Senate, certainly within the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are in a place where we haven't seen changes like some other states have seen because we haven't yet or currently had any votes at the state level to make major restrictions. But it's important to note that, like any state across the country, what we see locally, be it in Virginia or other states, could change because now there are no federal standards or protections currently. I, of course, as I mentioned, have voted twice and will continue to vote on opportunities to protect the rights of Americans to recognize that freedom's getting rolled back is not the direction we should be moving as a country. But at this point, the pieces of legislation we have put forth have not moved forward, have not received the votes, or have been blocked in the Senate.
We're talking with Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, and right now we've got Cliff on the line with this. Cliff is from Spotsylvania. Cliff, welcome to the phone call. What's on your mind tonight?
Yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak with Representative Spanberger. My concern has to do with the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And my concern is whether or not the Uniform Code of Military Justice or some other federal statute can be used to address those folk who entered the Capitol who are veterans, retired or otherwise, people who are receiving military pensions, people who are receiving disability benefits, and, of course, the overall package of benefits that are available through the VA. Yeah. My concern is whether or not, my interest is whether or not the UMCMJ and or federal statutes can be used to deny those people who have been identified as those who entered that Capitol and has since been convicted of a felony. Mm-hmm. Well, is there some mechanism in the legal system that would allow them to forfeit their pensions and benefits as a result of being convicted of a felony for their actions?
Well, Cliff, thank you for this.
As to whether or not you think something like this should occur.
Well, I want to thank you for your question related to January 6th, and certainly for noting the severity of that day when we saw just countless fellow Americans rush the Capitol, try to stop Congress from doing its duty of certifying the election, the 2020 election, and a violent attack on the Capitol that we know injured more than 150 Capitol police officers and DC Metro police officers. And I was in the Capitol, in the House chamber for the entirety of the assault on the Capitol. And when I exited, was able to exit, it was because police officers had subdued the insurrectionists. They were proned out on the ground, guns trained on them while they enabled us to escape the House chamber. So I'm forever grateful to the Capitol police officers, the Metropolitan police officers who reacted quickly and fought so bravely to protect the Capitol and protect the people in it and protect our democracy. To the Virginia State Police and Virginia National Guard, who are among the very first to arrive, to give them a bit of breather and to help secure their efforts. I'm forever grateful. Now, related to the question of those who are veterans, those who have been found guilty in civilian court because of the crimes that they committed on that day, how that might convey under UMCJ. That is a question that I will have to follow up with you on that specific question. Certainly from a congressional standpoint, my priority has been to allow the January 6th committee to do its work, to make clear what led up to that day, what occurred on that day, what are the risks related to that day moving forward as a nation, for it to continue its work in bringing to light so much of what those of us who were there saw that day, and certainly what so many American people know is a great risk to our democracy. So from a congressional standpoint, I have been focused on ensuring that committee is able to continue to do its work. And I've been a supporter of every iteration of what a committee or commission could look like. And certainly, I think that the committee is doing extraordinary work. And so that is first and foremost kind of the congressional piece of it. What might exist in terms of jurisdiction or impetus within the military court system, that is an aspect of the law. Again, as I'm sure you're well aware, it is functions under the military system. And so I will have to follow up to see if there has been any actions taken relative to veterans or active duty individuals who have been convicted in civilian court. I'm not aware of any such cases, but I will follow up with that on that question, and we'll follow up with you, Cliff. But I think you raise a really important question, particularly as we've seen such serious serious charges as seditious conspiracy charged against a variety of individuals, and certainly I don't know all of whether any of them had served or not served in the armed forces. But I think it's an important question to ask, but one that I'll have to look into in terms of what actions have or haven't been taken, and what might be the within the military criminal justice system, what actions might be taken.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As a reminder, this forum is interactive, and we'd love to hear your questions. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. A member of Congresswoman Spanberger's staff will collect your questions. You can also ask a question by submitting one through the portal below our online streaming player at spanberger.house.gov. Again, that's spanberger.house.gov/live. And if you're watching on Facebook Live tonight and you wish to ask the Congresswoman a question, we encourage you to visit that online streaming portal so you can submit your question. We're going to go back to the phones now. We're going to Chesterfield, where Bastian is with us. Bastian, welcome to the phone call tonight. What is your question?
Hi. I wanted to reference my question to the freedom to adapt the 529 and the retention refundable tax credit. For some parents, they can't afford the 529. They work at Walmart, McDonald's, the housekeeping at the hospital. And then other parents whose children, they know their family situation and they can't get into any of these programs through school. Some of these children have already graduated high school, and I know there are other programs out there. What resources or what recourse can they find or get into where they can get in these programs so they can become our next mechanics, truck drivers, HVAC people? What can they do? What can they find to get into these programs, or how can they get into these programs so that they can find jobs? Some of these children have invisible disabilities, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and they are hands-on visual learners, not so much of a reading learner, but they flourish and excel by doing things hands-on, where people are talking them through these things. And if they can find a way to learn outside of the box, then that would make up, I'm sure, a large portion, even if it's just a 10% large portion of our workforce. How can we get these children, or these young adults even, into programs that can help them?
Well, to follow up on the question, and thank you for raising this issue, because in my answer earlier, I did mention a bill related to 529. And I just want to say that that's one option, and certainly one option for parents who, or families or individuals or students who are able to save. But we also have legislation that would ensure expanded Pell Grant eligibility. So a student who would be Pell Grant eligible, that those Pell Grants could be utilized on other programs, not necessarily just a college degree program. So those programs exist, that is also legislation which I helped introduce, and Virginia's own Senator Kane is the Senate sponsor. It's an important piece of legislation recognizing that while valuable, 529s are not either are not accessible to everyone. depending upon how much, if someone's able to open them or not. But the Jobs Act is an important piece of legislation in tandem. And then notably, in terms of how students can find out about these other programs, for those who are in high school or entering high school across the 10 counties that I represent, the CTE programs in our community's high schools are pretty extraordinary. Everything from culinary to ag-related programs, mechanics, and kind of everything in between. So county to county, the programs do differ slightly. So certainly for students in a high school program, I would urge parents who might be listening to really explore what options exist. Again, across the counties, the 10 counties that I represent, the programs are very different, but all very, very strong. And then for someone who's already out in the workforce, already graduated from high school or already left high school, considering what might come next, there are phenomenal union training apprenticeship programs across Central Virginia. To be a welder, to be a pipe fitter, to be an electrician, to focus on elevator operation, painting. I mean, the list goes on. And I visited many of these training facilities. And the extraordinary thing is that these programs recognize that the skill set is hands-on. The skill set is one that when you're learning hands-on, this is the value and the trajectory that's literally the careers that built our nation. And so I would urge anyone who might be interested into looking into these programs. I recently met a woman who had decided that she wanted to become an electrician, kind of mid-career, and found out about the union program, applied, was admitted, and has gone through that apprenticeship program. She's working, she's making money, she's learning an extraordinary skill. And I just saw her a couple weekends ago, and she said that her adult son is now himself applied for the program, and he'll be entering just a couple years behind her. So recognizing how incredibly important and vital the program has been to changing her life, her son is now following suit. And between the two of them, there will be two generations of electricians who are going to be, working across Virginia, helping our communities, and it's of such great value. So to answer the question, high school programs, local apprenticeship programs are across Virginia. Our skilled trades and our union programs are extraordinary. And then the bill that I mentioned, the Jobs Act, the longer title is the Jumpstart Our Businesses by Supporting Students Act. And that's the one that supports greater access through Pell Grants.
All right, turn is from the phones one more time. And this is Stephen from Henrico. Stephen, you are on live with Congresswoman Spanberger. What is your question?
My concern is that there are a lot of people who have worked a lifetime and supported Social Security. And unfortunately, the price of everything has gone up to over 9%. It'd probably be over 10% before the year is out. If these people, I'm in my 80s and I'm retired, I'm past the point where I can really do a lot of work. So I want to make sure that the increase in the Social Security payment for next year is at least 10% or more. And I'm sure I have a lot of friends and relatives in my age bracket that are in their 80s, and working is not necessarily something that we can do anymore. But we do need to eat. We do need to pay our mortgage. We do need to pay our medical. And we just have to get that increase on our checks starting next year of at least 10%.
Stephen, thank you for this comment, and certainly I think that you speak on behalf of pretty much anyone across the district on a fixed income, particularly those while some do choose to work a little bit in their retirement or a lot in their retirement. Certainly, as you mentioned, Stephen, for many of your peers, that's really no longer an option. And frankly, the point is that it shouldn't have to be. And so we know that inflation hurts individuals who are on a fixed income most of all. We know that the challenge is not just with Social Security and what Social Security is relative to overall inflation rates, but we also know that there's been increased Medicare premiums, and that's particularly been fueled by the high cost of prescription drugs, and in particular one specific Alzheimer's drug, Aduhelm. And so I have heard from constituents across our district that not only are they worried about how far they can stretch their Social Security, but they're also impacted by increases in Medicare premiums. And certainly that can eat into the COLA adjustment. I am doing a lot of work to address some of the root causes of inflation, address inflation across the board. For all Americans and Virginians who are impacted, the lower food and fuel Cost Act is a bill that I introduced focused on bringing down the cost of food at the grocery store, particularly meat and poultry, and bringing down the cost at the pump. Certainly directionally, the cost at the pump is going the right direction, but I want to see a lot more progress. And the Lower Food and Fuel Cost Act provides much greater flexibilities for year-round biofuel, ethanol utilization, blended gasoline, which is important, particularly as we're still seeing refinery capacity below what it should be. But Stephen, in terms of what your specific comment was about in terms of the Social Security adjustment, my commitment is to Social Security full stop. It's to protecting Social Security, which certainly we have seen some federal legislators who wish to undo Social Security completely. I think it is the absolute bedrock of a dignified retirement. Am committed to absolutely protecting it and ensuring that it meets the retirement needs of those who have planned for it, paid into it, and then planned for it to be there. So I hear you on the cost of living adjustment. I continue to be engaged on this issue as we move forward, and I will be reporting back as we continue to look at cost of living adjustments into the future.
All right, thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our live event this evening, but before we bid you all a good evening, we'd like to turn the floor back over to Congresswoman Spanberger one more time for some final comments. Congresswoman.
Thank you so much for joining tonight for this town hall. I am grateful for the opportunity to answer your questions. And I am appreciative of the very broad types of questions we received related to immigration, energy independence, Ukraine, skilled trade, education of our nation's youth, the benefits that exist for veterans or should exist for veterans, and certainly the importance of Social Security. So thank you for joining us. I look forward to answering future questions on future town halls, but I do want to let you know, anyone who doesn't currently follow or receive our newsletter, once a week we send out a newsletter with legislative updates. We provide information about the legislation that I have voted on, that I've introduced, that I'm supporting. We also provide information that might be of interest, particularly for those who rely on federal programs, who might engage frequently with the VA or with Social Security. We provide valuable information there. And you can go to our website at spanberger.house.gov and sign up for that newsletter. We usually, unless there's some important information to convey, limit it to once a week, a weekly roundup. And I hope that you'll find it valuable information. I do want to remind anyone who's listening that if you are facing any challenges specific to Social Security, the VA, Medicare, OPM, password and visas, the list goes on, please know that our team is here to support you and to answer questions. So please do call our district office with any questions that you might have. We look forward to opening a case and helping work through whatever questions or challenges you may be facing with a federal agency. We are not able to drive the outcome, but we certainly will ensure that you know that someone is watching your case closely and advocating for you the best that we can. We have so far returned more than $18 million back to constituents since I first took office in 2019, and that's because we were able to help constituents receive the veterans benefit or the OPM benefits or Social Security that they had earned and that they deserved. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the support that we've offered. And certainly, if we can help you with anything, please do be in touch. Thanks for joining this evening. If you have any follow-up questions, I invite you to call our office or send me a letter or be in touch. And I want to make sure that you all know what it is I've been working on your behalf and the status of legislation that might be important to you. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening and a good start to your week.
All right. Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And if you would like to call the Congresswoman's district office, that number is 804-401-4110. Again, 804-401-4110 during normal business hours, or go to spanberger.house.gov. Thank you all once again for joining us. Stay safe and have a good evening.